Thank you, Secretary General, for this lovely introduction. We're all excited here for the long-awaited launch of Cities in the World, the long-term study that is a collaborative effort between the OECD, the EU, the World Bank, and UN Habitat. And here we will hear how we are creating a standard definition of cities. Please, Commissioner.
Dear Secretary General, Carissimo Angel, all of you, thank you very much for this opportunity. And I am really, really pleased and really honored to open this digital launch event. Of course, I would prefer that we could see each other, that we could meet. I had organized with Joaquin that I would go to Paris, but Paris became too far away all of a sudden. And so here we are in front of our web cameras. And I am really, but anyway, I'm really very pleased to launch this event on the reports on cities in the world. It is really a great pleasure that we can all of us together announce the delivery of this report. First, because the report gives a new perspective on urbanization. Second, because it is a result of a joint and fruitful work, not just between the OECD and the European Commission, but with no less than 6 international organizations.
This meeting is being recorded.
All together, working together, and you know how much, how difficult it is sometimes to work with 1 or 2 institutions, so 6 international organizations, it's really something. My thanks to all of you, because this requires a lot of collaborative spirit, a lot of work, a lot of coordination, and a lot of focusing, so that you deliver what we are proposed to do. We were proposed to do, and this coalition of talent was absolutely critical to reaching this ambitious goal. And with a reasonable time, it was fairly quick. As you'd expect, with 6 organizations of this importance, this responsibility, the work has necessarily been in depth. It has been technically sound, and it is above all a very useful instrument. Because with a common definition of cities, the report also provides new evidence on urbanization in the world, using for the first time the definitions endorsed at the 2020 Statistical Commission of the United Nations. And I had also the occasion to share these expectations when we were together in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi. State-of-the-art tools have been deployed, including online tools, to ease the application of the definition. And later this year, we will publish new global data based on the latest European satellites, Sentinel-1 and 2. However, this collaboration was not only for the pleasure of working together, a pleasure to do research with distinguished partners. Now, this work lays a solid foundation and provides critical intelligence for our policy goals. And that is the ultimate purpose of what we are doing. Common definitions enable us to collect data and have a better knowledge of trends, of challenges. And this is of course crucial for academics, but it is even more crucial for policymakers, so that our policies, the policies that we develop, are better informed and more effective. First, it helps meet goals at the global level, but also at the European level. And as European Commissioner, I think I should stress this angle of the issue. As you know, we in Europe, we are committed to sustainable development as never before in its broadest terms. Transition to the carbon neutral economy, transition to the digital economy, and to making that green digital economy work for everyone. We have decided at the beginning of this commission, even before the pandemic, to integrate the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDG, in the European semester, which is our system of economic governance in the EU, so trying to make recommendations along those lines. And the Commission, in the follow-up of this terrible crisis, has just proposed a comprehensive financial package aiming at creating the financial conditions to structure the recovery along these targets, so to make it future-oriented, not to use the same tools on which we were working before, but to take, again, of this crisis to try to grasp the opportunity inside it and to launch the recovery on different bases, and in particular on this greening, this digital, this cohesive kind of approach. This is ambitious, so we need effective intelligence. We need to be able to measure achievement towards the SDG by degree of urbanization. This will ensure that we deliver on our ambitions. Sometimes this will require innovative solutions. For example, satellite images can show which cities suffer from air pollution or which ones are expanding more quickly and in which direction. Furthermore, we can monitor access to public transport by combining population data, street networks, and information on public transport stops. So this is really a huge quality amount of information and tools. All this will give us a much richer view of how we are doing in meeting our goals and what remains to be done, which is really a crucial element. Today's work definitely lays the foundation for that. My second point, this work supports our goals at the local level. This report reminds us that cities, towns, and rural areas each have different constraints and opportunities. This is why a one-size-fits-all policy will never work for all territories. This is why EU cohesion policy invests in regional and place-based strategies. For local partnerships, this report and work will be a precious source of data, enabling them not only to diagnose local conditions, but to compare, to contrast with similar areas across Europe and potentially across the world. It will help locate agents, take up the sustainable development agenda, but this work also enables us to go deeper. We are all aware that the relationship between towns and the neighboring areas is not simple. It's quite complex. It's not cut and dried. Cities and towns cannot be separated from their regions. They are embedded in the broader functional areas and in relationship with neighboring urban areas. So it is more accurate to see a given territory as a complex network rather than adding up of separate entities. This can never work. One of our concerns here is that towns and citizens should spread their wealth and serve the broader area, rather than concentrating the wealth and drawing away from others. And this is a very important element. So the present work also from this point of view, the present work and report is a good start for a deeper analysis of the dynamics between cities and their surrounding areas, and of identifying what effective role the city is playing in relation to the dynamics of the overall area where it is integrated, and how far this concept of functional areas is exactly working or not, or working in a reverse sense. Especially since instead of proposing a simple dichotomy of urban and rural, there are in fact three different classes with three different characteristics. That middle category along with the more fine-grained definition of and views of towns, helps make towns and their local ecosystems much more visible. So thank you for that as well. Third, this work enables us to respond to crises and to the unexpected, and that's the life we are going through. The COVID-19 crisis highlighted the specific and quite different vulnerabilities of cities and rural areas. The cases appeared first in the biggest and the most connected cities in Europe. They only spread to smaller towns and rural areas at a later stage. Rural residents tend to be older, and distances to health care facilities tend to be greater. Better intelligence on town and city structure is an important first step in managing this aspect as well. Our territories have to adapt. Now that we are starting to emerge from lockdown, cities must find a way to space people out on the squares or on sidewalks or on streets. A fine-grained view of space helps definitely urban planners as we prepare to develop strategies for our recovery, and the funding the Commission is proposing is robust. It's a huge responsibility on how we are going to use it, how we are going to deliver our targets. So we need to be mindful of the spatial dimension of recovery. This cannot be a territorial blind recovery, as the challenges greatly differ. And the horizontal policies, as we all know, they have completely asymmetric impacts on the territory. Moreover, the recovery presents opportunities for the green transition, as I mentioned in the beginning. Many cities are already thinking about it, promoting walking and cycling, try to reduce street parking. This is a further opportunity to create bike lanes, pedestrianized streets, allow cafes and restaurants to expand their terraces. So everybody is starting to think about it just as we speak. All this can help revitalize our city centers in a safer manner, reducing pollution, congestion, and crowding on public transport, improving the quality of public transport, in public health and well-being. Again, good intelligence is the first step. And of course, urban centers are strong contributors through transport and through housing to a substantial amount of our overall pollution. So, in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, many thanks to all collaborators from the 6 international organizations. I hope we'll see more such collaborations in the future. Today, we have seen a step change in terms of policy intelligence at the territorial level, a change which will help us meet our sustainable development goals at the European level, at the local level, and help us better to respond to the unexpected, and also at the international and global level. This report shows what issues need to be tackled in cities, in towns, and in rural areas to make sure we leave no one behind, and that we use in the most intelligent way the available instruments that we have. It shows the importance of regionally and locally targeted policies, as every type of territory has its own challenges. We need to continue to invest in all these different types of territories so that citizens achieve a high standard of living no matter where they live. And this is the challenge we have in front of us. So thank you once again. And let's go on working, cooperating, and let's grasp this opportunity, given that we could not avoid the crisis. Let's make the best out of coming out of it. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you, Commissioner, for laying out the importance of this report. We're really thankful that you appreciate so much of its importance. Secretary General Gouveia.
Thank you very much. I normally, wave and present in front of an audience, the publication that we are rolling out. We're so proud, and we're so proud of this joint work. It's my pleasure to launch the Cities in the World, a new perspective on urbanization. This report is a very exciting project that the OECD and the European Commission have been jointly undertaking. It provides a new groundbreaking perspective on cities and of the global urbanization process. In our world profoundly shaped by the COVID-19 pandemic, cities have an important role to play in tackling the crisis. They are better equipped to respond to challenges due to their well-developed healthcare facilities. However, they're also densely populated places where people live, where people gather, and therefore at greater risk of spreading the virus. Now, 2 years ago, it seems so long, when we kicked off this project together, we all agreed on one fundamental idea. We cannot talk about cities and provide adequate policy responses to the challenges they face without accurate and comparable data at the global scale. So this is doubly important in the current context. So we set to work. As Commissioner Ferreira has just highlighted, we now have a new set of definitions approved by the UN Statistical Commission and comparable data on cities, metropolitan and urban and rural areas. So you cover the whole range. With these new definitions, we're also able to move away from the traditional urban-rural dichotomy. You know, it's much more complicated than that. And the process, the transition process is much more complicated. And we're getting out of this dichotomy by considering a novel category, the towns and semi-dense areas, which are halfway between urban and rural areas. Now, this innovation constitutes, together with a focus on what we would call functional areas, a new way of approaching the issue, a new way of thinking. Now, indeed, since 2010, the OECD has adopted a harmonized definition of cities backed by governments called, quote unquote, functional urban areas. No, this is, I think, we're already by the meeting of Habitat. Now, this was done in collaboration with the European Commission and has led to a unique database that allows us to make meaningful comparisons between metropolitan areas in different OECD countries on trends related to demographics, income, air quality, a range of other topics through the more than 50 indicators that are available. So we have now extended this approach to a global scale. Very ambitious undertaking. Now, so what have we learned by applying our new global definitions? Let me briefly mention some of the findings. First, the global urbanization process is uneven. Large metropolitan areas grow fastest, while many small and mid-sized metropolitan areas are actually shrinking. Since 2000, across the world, large metropolitan areas with more than 1 million inhabitants have grown by more than 400 million people altogether. This has created formidable policy challenges for public transport, affordable housing, and public service provision. Now, towns are also growing. Towns are turning into cities. They're turning into metropolitan areas, principally in Africa and in South Asia. Around 4,000 new metropolitan areas emerged between 1975 and 2015, accounting for 1/3 of all metropolitan areas in the world. At the same time, 1/5 of the metropolitan areas are shrinking. Now, this is a global trend, by the way, but it's mostly happening in East Asia and Europe, where the population is stagnating, or in fact, in some cases, has started to decline. In these countries, policymakers will have to ensure that public services like education, health, remain accessible to residents. All this while facing tough budgetary pressures. We always have budgetary pressures, but going forward, among other things, because of the legacy of the cost of fighting the crisis, obviously we're going to be perhaps a little heavier on the both government debt as well as enterprise debt, but perhaps even more household debt. Now, let me go to this second learning, let's say second lesson. The shape and form of many cities is actually changing. Cities around the world are not only growing, but have tended to become denser rather than sprawling, rather than, just spreading around. Since 1975, 70% of population growth in cities on average has occurred through densification, which means population has grown within the old city borders. This result is rather surprising because the a priori thought is that cities tend to sprawl out of their historical boundaries. But we have seen the opposite. We have seen a densification. Cities are densifying at different rates, however, in different parts of the world. In lower income countries, densification grew at 4 times the rate of higher income countries. This fast growth and the increasing population density of cities raises many new challenges, but also reminds us, accentuates some old ones. This includes affordable housing, congestion, pollution, transport. In short, it poses questions about what sustainable development should be about. What are we talking about when we say sustainable development? And of course, it's an issue that is more pressing than ever. In this context, climate change, and particularly the COVID-19 pandemic now, as in the more immediate present, demonstrates the vulnerability of accepting the status quo. We need to rethink and adapt cities to achieve greater resilience and enhance sustainable development around the world. And third, cities still offer a higher quality of life than other areas in many respects. For the first time, we have a comprehensive assessment of differences in quality of life among different areas across the globe. Again, a first. Many firsts, I have to say. We should be very, very proud, all our colleagues that participated and joined us in this effort. In most countries, city residents are on average more likely to be satisfied with their lives. They also tend to suffer less from health problems, enjoy more economic opportunities, and have greater access to services and technology. Dear friends, Commissioner, the report we're launching today sets the bar on how we analyze cities, how we analyze metropolitan areas, how we look at rural areas going forward. It sets the standard, it sets the stage. It raises the bar in many ways. It is also a reminder of the important role that cities have in tackling the coronavirus pandemic. The OECD stands ready to continue working with policymakers across the world to ensure that, armed with this new data, we are able to shape better policies for better cities, for better lives. So thank you very much. Again, congratulations. We are today really celebrating a very important achievement.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. And indeed, we are celebrating a very important achievement. And Lamia Kamal Troy is going to walk us through this wonderful book. It is a book that anyone who calls himself or herself an urbanist must read. Lamia?
Thank you very much, Eugenie, Secretary General, dear Commissioner, dear colleagues, dear friends. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to make a PowerPoint presentation to show you some of the things that the Secretary General just presented, some of the highlights, but this time with data visualization, with chart, with maps, because we have to recall that this is first and foremost a huge statistical work. So now I'm going to share my screen, and I hope I'm going to be very good in doing that. Does it work?
Yes.
Can you see? Great. So Mr. Gourier, in his presentation, he has mentioned that this work, and also the Commissioner, this work has produced for data for the whole world, is not just part of the work, following two consistent global definitions of cities and metropolitan areas. And this has definitively filled a void. There was no consistent global definition. Therefore, by doing so, actually, we provided a more nuanced view, departing from the traditional urban-rural dichotomy, but also a more granular view, a more accurate view of what urban and cities really means. And this was an issue before, because everybody was talking about cities, and it was not very much precise. So according to the first categorization, remember there were two. The one that distinguishes cities with towns and semi-dense areas and with rural areas. We can see here that actually 48% of the total population today lives in cities. And actually, the city populations have doubled over the last 40 years. And in the next slide, we can see that city populations are projected to keep rapidly growing until 2050, from 48% to 55% of the world population. You can see here, in absolute terms, population of both rural areas and towns and semi-dense areas are projected to grow by around 10% over the period 2015-2050, but the share in the total world population will decline. So we can really say today that globally, urbanization is spreading. Let me now turn to the question of the metropolization of the world. Beyond the three categories I just mentioned, this report has also developed data for functional urban areas that extend beyond cities to include commuting zones. The Secretary General just mentioned that we have started to do this work a long time ago, hand in hand with the European Commission, but today this is a work that is covering the whole world. This report documents a very important trend as well, thanks to this new data collection. That is an increasing concentration of population in metropolitan areas, and especially in the largest ones. Across the world, there are over 9,000 metropolitan areas of more than 50,000 inhabitants. And among these, the 542 metro with over 1 million, actually they accounts for 60% of the total population growth in metropolitan areas. So large metropolitan areas have been growing faster, and this is a global phenomenon, as this trend happens across all types of regions in the world. With some slight nuances, though, that I would like to highlight, some nuances across continents. For instance, in Asia, where overall population stagnates, metropolitan areas with over 5 million are those that have been growing the fastest. In low-income countries, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, this process of metropolitanization is really the strongest actually now. So the increasing concentration of people in large metropolitan areas exacerbates challenges for transport provision, affordable housing, and pollution, something that actually you have been hearing. But here we have the data to demonstrate why this is the fact. Again, something that was mentioned by both the Secretary General and the Commissioner, the question of new and unprecedented challenges that actually has not really received sufficient attention. Some metropolitan areas are shrinking. You can see them in the map. They are represented by the red dots. Our data show that 20% of all metropolitan areas in the world are shrinking. This is happening primarily in Europe and East Asia, and we can expect maybe in the future that is going to happen also in other continents. Small and medium-sized metro areas are the most vulnerable. Over 40% of metro areas with less than 1 million are shrinking in this part of the world. So we really need to pay more attention to this trend, as by 2050, the issue is going to become even more pressing. Almost 30% of all metropolitan in the world will be shrinking versus 20% today. What does it mean? It means that policymakers will have really to manage this decline smartly, because shrinking metropolitan areas mean shrinking tax base while maintaining the obligation to maintain public infrastructure and services. So tough choices will have to be made. We will have to rethink new forms of urban planning. And so far, by having worked with a lot of countries, I have seen only a very interesting debate in the case of Japan, but not so much in many other countries. And this is something that needs that deserves much more attention. Let's talk about now the relationship between urbanization and economic development. Our data shows that across the world, economic development and the rise of metropolitan areas have gone hand in hand. There is no clear link in terms of causality, but what we know is that economic growth and urbanization is generally thought to be a two-way relationship. In advanced economies, more people live in metropolitan areas. 70% live in metropolitan areas in high-income countries compared to only 30% in low-income countries. This difference is more striking for large and very large metropolitan area, respectively more than 1 million or more than 5 million inhabitants. Actually, the population share living in metropolitan area above 1 million is roughly 4 times higher in high income than in low income countries. Urbanization and the concentration of metropolitan population is also linked to the phenomenon of within country regional disparities. As countries develop, of course, they become more urbanized in some of the regions. That drives regional disparities as more metropolitan regions tend to be richer. In middle income countries where the metropolitan population tends to be strongly concentrated in a small number of regions, economic disparities between regions peak. But then at higher levels of economic development, metropolitan areas is more spread across space, and with this, economic inequality between regions tend to decrease. So if the world is more and more urbanized, how is life in cities? The report presents a novel assessment of quality of life in cities. It not only documents those differences across the cities in the world, but also it quantifies them, and it does so for many dimensions. What we did, we collected data on life satisfaction, which is an overarching measure of quality of life, from the global Gallup survey from 111 countries. And what we found is that as compared to towns and semi-dense areas and to rural areas, cities offer the highest quality of life, which explains why people continue to be attracted by cities and why urbanization continued to spread. The higher quality of life in cities is explained by several dimensions. Cities tend to offer better income and job opportunities, better health outcome, including access to healthcare, higher educational attainment, and more access to services, amenities, and technology. Even though living in a city also comes with disadvantages, more crime and violence, urban ills, overall, people tend to favor living in cities. And I know there is a debate about the impact of COVID, as whether city will continue to attract people or people will move. But we will see. It's a very controversial debate. Many things that at one stage, business as usual will prevail and people will continue to go to cities, and other things that maybe there will be a better distribution. So the last key findings from the report I'd like to share with you is on urbanization and then how the shape of our cities is evolving. How do cities grow morphologically? Do they grow by becoming denser in the same area or by spatial expansion? Across the world, cities differ enormously in terms of population density. Overall, the general trend is that cities all over the world are not only growing, but also becoming denser. This is the general trend. Actually, the density of cities is 4 times higher in low-income countries than in high-income countries. The reports and data enable a novel decomposition of city growth into intensive densification and extensive expansion growth. We have seen that over the last 40 years, most cities have grown more in density rather than by spatial expansion. Since 2000, for instance, almost 2/3 of population growth in cities has been accounted for by densification. However, spatial expansion is also significant. In low and middle income countries, city expands by 2 to 3% per year. This means they would double or triple in size surface within 40 years. So this trend poses, again, new challenges. In some cases, cities that are expanding in surface and sprawling raise questions of sustainability, but there are also limits of high densification, the type of high densification that we can find, for instance, in many cities in low-income countries. Notably, Asian cities are already extremely dense compared to North American ones, and even compared to European ones. In essence, managing densification or spatial expansion really required a targeted approach. It cannot be the same one. The growth and increasing density of cities raise serious challenges. Many cities are highly exposed to floods and storm surges, with 1 in 5 city residents around the world living in an area that will be submerged in a big flood. I'm talking about 750 million people, 750 million people affected worldwide. And 1 in 7 city residents are exposed to storm surges. The risks related to the climate emergency are becoming more pressing for city dwellers. Of course, these risks are very well known to all of us, and we have been hearing that for a long time. But here they are very well documented. So actually, if we fail to take action to mitigate them, it's not because we don't have the data today. We do have the data, and we need to show more this very worrisome data. Let me now conclude with what is next for us as a follow-up to this very important work. This work, as mentioned by the Commissioner and by the Secretary General, is unprecedented. It helps us better understand, better categorize, and measure how our world is populated. It helps us identify the requirements for prosperous and inclusive cities, towns, and rural areas, and it provides a new tools for policymakers to better monitor and pursue the SDGs, actively helping them to achieve them. The findings from this huge statistical project raise a number of challenges that we intend to address in our work as asked by our member countries in our Regional Development Policy Committee and the different working parties. For instance, how to address the challenges of the large number of OECD metropolitan areas that are shrinking. As I mentioned, this was not really discussed in many countries. How to manage urban concentration in large metropolitan areas in a more sustainable manner. What about intermediate cities? They are key for connecting rural and urban area and providing urban services and amenities to rural residents. But many are very much vulnerable to population decline. What are we going to do with these intermediate cities? And the question on how to enhance digital and physical infrastructure as well as service provision in rural areas. So I would like to invite you, you have here all the information. We have a hub, we have a regional statistic hub with all the data. You can visit the hub. And in conclusion, allow me please just to express my deep gratitude to my team, to Rudiger, to Lucas, to Paolo, but also especially to my deputy, Joachim Oliveira Martin, who is going to retire at the end of the year. And I know he has put a lot of effort and all his heart on this very important work. And of course, I would like to thank as well Lewis in the European Commission, who has been actually working with us for so many years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lamia. Certainly as director of the OECD Center of Entrepreneurship, SMEs in Regions and Cities, you have laid out the challenges for our next two panels. The next panel will be a panel on the implications of the report for urban policy from an international perspective. And that will be followed by a second panel on what lessons for well-being, economic development, spatial planning, and transport this report holds for us. And we will then have closing remarks on the outlook for the future work.
Eugenie, if I may, only just one moment. I am off now to Latvia in order to present a piece of work called Policy Action for Affordable Housing in Latvia, which again has a lot to do with some of the issues that we are discussing now. So I will leave you, and again, thank you all. You have been wonderful. You have been very inspirational. And of course, we're counting on you for the work going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary General. Be sure to take this report with you and flash it to them in Latvia.
I will be taking copies everywhere I go. Don't worry.
Excellent, because it sets the scene for affordable housing.
Well, which is basically my table in my office here, or in my dining room. But still, I'll always I always wave the work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll miss you, but have a good trip. So in this panel, we have Carla Montesi, who's the Director of Planet and Prosperity of DG DevCo, the European Commission, Same Wabe, who's the Global Director of the Urban Disaster Risk Management, Resilience and Land Global Practice of the World Bank, and J. Vernon Henderson, Professor of Economic Geography, the London School of Economics. Let's plunge right in. Same, you've heard this report. Tell us what kind of implications it's going to have in the work of the World Bank.
Thank you very much, Jeannie, and it really is a great opportunity for me to be here and to contribute to the discussion of this very important report. I mean, we've been working with Louis on the underlying idea of this report for quite a bit of time, on the need for a harmonized definition for urban areas. And I think the reasons and the implications for urban policy making are really immense. I mean, from our perspective, the three main variables that are shaping the world that we live in are urbanization, climate change, and conflict. And of course, technology was always a variable in there, and now we're throwing in epidemic in a different manifestation of crises. But if you look at it, we're capable of doing pretty sophisticated climate change forecasts and modeling in our measurement of conflict and internal displacement. Documentation of impact has improved, and this was the weak link in there, our ability to have a harmonized definition on urban that is actually a technical definition as opposed to relying on administrative definitions that are defined by the different countries and that are making it practically impractical to compare apples and oranges. So, I mean, we always used to say the world is 55% urban, but it's your urban and my urban. And I happen to come also from Egypt, and, I've been studying urban for a long period of time. And I was always befuddled by the fact that Egypt has managed to remain 43% urban for 40 years in a row. So, I mean, it really defied the laws of gravity in here. And I recall, I mean, it's a bit of a funny anecdote, but I had returned after I finished my PhD at Harvard, and I was teaching 1 year at Cairo University, and I was teaching the planning studio. And it was about peri-urban growth. So we picked randomly a settlement, rural settlement in the peri-urban fringe of Cairo. And I took my students, we had the 96 census maps. And I took my students to go and start doing the field surveys out there so that we can start thinking about planning. And, there were 10 structures on the 1996 map. We arrived in 2003 with the students. There were 30,000 structures and 275,000 residents in there, in a 10-person structure from a map of few years beforehand. And that was just about what was happening. And the underlying rationale is pretty, understandable. I mean, the government has a definition of levels of service delivery that it needs to provide to urban areas. So the moment it reclassifies an area from rural to urban, it needs to provide it with the hospital, the courthouse, the police station, and a gamut of delivery that is costly. So therefore, delaying that definition, you throw in the politics as well of regional representation and parliamentary representation, and it's understandable. So with this new definition, from our perspective, as an international development community that is working to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, as a World Bank that's working to achieve its twin goals of, alleviating extreme poverty and boosting shared prosperity, now we're capable of actually aggregating the outcomes and disaggregating the outcomes in terms of urban and rural, understanding their differential impact, comparing what's happening in countries and the policies that they have used in a way that's meaningful. But also we can finally understand better the linkages between urbanization and economic growth. I mean, we know that they go hand in hand. We know that, there's no country that has moved to middle income status without urbanizing, and no country has moved to upper income status without having vibrant cities. But we can better now understand the relationship between both, and then have a finer grain understanding on service delivery. So obviously the benefits are immense. Now, there are some surprising findings. I mean, I'm not surprised that obviously the world is more urban than we thought, in the sense when you combine the two categories of cities, but also, towns as this transitional category. And at the same time, there are surprising findings for me, like, for instance, that the densest cities are, in the lowest income countries and regions. So, and here I think it brings us to a notion of density that has two different facets. There's the density of people versus, the density of capital. And I think, especially in a COVID and a post-COVID world, you need to have a better understanding of those two dimensions of density, because, the first thing that people said about COVID is that obviously the culprits are density and large cities, whereas in reality, the cities that are large and dense have fared very differently depending on their levels of infrastructure, on their population socioeconomic outcomes, comorbidities, and what have you. So there was a whole range of other factors. And it brought very clearly the notion of you can have places that are dense, but this density, because it's poorly managed, is about crowdedness. It's the overcrowded housing, it's the lacking infrastructure, the limited public space, and what have you. And these are, if you want, COVID-19 hotspots, very different from places that are where the density is, developed floor space that allows for social distancing, better infrastructure. So the notion of, a uniform version of density, I think, will need to evolve also to enable policy making by looking at those two dimensions.
That's
Another,
remarkable. That's
okay,
remarkable, Sunday, in terms of what you'll be doing in terms of investment. And Carla, you too are involved in thinking about investment in foreign aid and development work. Do you see the same sorts of importance in this study that Same saw for your work?
Let me say that, of course, this report we have an important role in our international cooperation. Let me say from the beginning that I'm not coming into this debate as an expert on urban development, but just on the wider international cooperation and the wider sustainable development, the job and the growth. I think the link is very clear. You have already listened to our commissioner. She mentioned our high-level strategic objective. She mentioned the Green Deal, the green transformation, job and growth, digital transformation, countering inequalities, contributing to the achievement of sustainable development goals. Of course, when we look to all these high-level priorities, are the high-level priorities in our international cooperation with countries. And as was already mentioned by the previous speaker, of course, when we look to these, cities and the urban development are at the core of this high-level objective. So come to speak about this on the basis of data, on the basis of this research that was done, let me say that it's really very, very useful. So to have now these data sets on urban development that is based on a consistent definition that will allow us to do some comparable analysis across countries will be very helpful for us when we are preparing our strategic intervention in our relation with international partners. I can see clearly three elements that could be very useful for us. The first one is will help us to give a further impetus to the countries to look to the role of the urbanization in their development strategy. So today it's important that when we look to the global development strategy in our partner countries, and I am thinking more in Africa, of course, it's important that they link, that they have the acknowledgement of what is happening at the level of urban development. So we really would like to use this study, and we are already working with GRC on how we use these studies, this research in our strong cooperation, in our dialogue with the partner countries when we are trying to reinforce our dialogue on the policy, on the development policy to core. The second element that was already mentioned, it's the monitoring of the SDGs. This is really very important. We think that this new data set will allow a much better monitoring of SDG and not just on SDG 11, the urban SDG, but for most of the SDGs that target, for which we need disaggregated information for urban and rural areas. So this data will help us in improving this SDG reporting and in feeding our policy dialogue. The third element that I want to mention is, of course, this data set will help us in creating the new insights. I think that Sam already mentioned the link between sustainable development, growth, and urbanization. Today, we are not sure what is the impact on the different partners that we have on the sustainable development. We don't have really an insight on how we can better combine sustainable development with the urbanization. So, of course, this data will feed our research agenda to try to better understand the different development partners. So we'll surely be user of such new insights. And so this is the reason why we really very much welcome the work that was done. And let me say that this work is coming in a crucial moment where we are, as you maybe know, starting the programming exercise, starting the programming of what will be the coming 7-year financial framework. We are at the moment preparing our strategic partnership with our partner countries. We are fixing what will be the big priorities in our future relation with the partner countries. And let me say that, of course, urban development, cities, smart city, sustainable urban development will be a key priorities in our work with partner countries. So to have this data, this report, and use that in our policy dialogue with the countries will be really very, very appreciated, very, very useful. So I stop here, but I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the people, all the experts that were behind this work. Thanks for this initiative, and will be key in preparing our future strategic priority with our partner countries. Many thanks. Over to you.
Thank you, Carla. You've already given us definite proof of the importance of this report, as did Same. Now, Vernon, we've heard a lot about the developing world. This report also applies to the whole world as itself. And there are these new definitions of intermediate spaces. I'm wondering if you'd like to say something about those two topics.
Right. So, I mean, let me start with, however, the developing world. The developed world's doing pretty good in many of these dimensions. In the developing world, and this is building somewhat on what Same had to say in the report, that we find that the allocation of utilities, sanitation, water, electricity, schools, health clinics, and so on, are heavily biased towards capitals, national capitals, regional capitals, biased towards cities over rural areas and over this intermediate category of towns in the report. And these biases hold even after factoring out the differences in density. So, and I note also that in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia, that populations live at very high densities compared to North America and Europe. So 55% of the population in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia live at densities over 5,000 people per square kilometer. That number in North America would be 10%, and Europe would be 20 to 25%. And in terms of people living above 20,000 people per square kilometers, there's almost no one in Europe or North America, but in Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa it would be over 20%. In this are a variety of smaller towns and dense settlements that are dense, and therefore it's cost effective to some degree to service them, that are very poorly serviced. So that raises kind of two issues. One is the obvious equity issue, but it also raises an issue of the urbanization process that, I know in many parts of the urbanizing world, and in particular in sub-Saharan Africa, we feel that large cities are kind of overwhelmed with the population growth at 4 or 5% a year. And, you know, you ask the question, to what extent are people moving to those cities versus for productivity reasons versus to get services? And if you better service the towns and would you, in fact, be able to slow that population growth? So those are my basic comments.
Well, absolutely. This is really very illuminating what you've all said. We don't have any open questions, so I'm going to ask each of the panelists to form a question that you want the next panel to answer. And the next panel is on what lessons for well-being, economic development, spatial planning, and transport does this have? Question from your point of view as a policymaker. So I'll turn to Same first. Sorry.
Can I think a little bit?
Well, you're going to have to be investing how many billions of dollars in the next few months, as you reported to everyone in the COVID response. So maybe there's something related to that.
No, it's mainly exactly. I mean, it's this notion. I mean, the biggest trade-off that we have right now is, do we invest in upgrading cities as they are? So it's more or less, if you will, the densification formula versus, you know, expanding cities at the periphery. I mean, the upgrading, especially when it's about retrofitting, you know, will obviously cost much more. I mean, in terms of retrofitting infrastructure in slums and informal settlements. Versus, let's say, the urban expansion at the periphery, which is more or less greenfield development. Okay. And that trade-off, I think, is instrumental in, and we'd love to hear from the other panel about which of those.
Direction. Okay, that's great. How about you, Carla? I can move on to Vernon if you want me to.
Okay. So sorry. No. But if you can just repeat the question, because I'm not sure that I listen well. So could you just tell me again?
From your point of view as a policymaker, what would you like the next panel to answer in terms of lessons learned from this report? We have some.
Yes, thank you. I think that there will be many, but you know, I was mentioning one will be working also into Green Deal, green transition. So smart will be for us new development. The state of work is in this domain.
I'm afraid you froze on that one. Maybe you can put your chat and we'll move on to Vernon.
Well, okay, so let me...
one question, Vernon.
Let me build upon Same. I mean, there is this debate about, you know, should we emphasize urbanization on the outskirts versus densification? And the drive is to densification, that's undeniable. And I guess the question is, I know we have this debate about retrofitting versus, you know, starting in greenfield with development, but what is the capacity of these countries in Sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia to actually go out and service these ex-urban areas, to build the infrastructure, to put in whatever you think. I mean, we have, for example, there's almost no central sewerage in African cities.
Okay, I think we get it. Yeah. Very good. Yeah. We've got center city versus suburbs, or center cities versus the periphery, and what is the capacity of cities to absorb the growth, whatever the decision is. And I think Carla's question was something about smart cities, but she'll put that in chat and we'll all know. So let's move now. Thank you very much, panelists, for this wonderful discussion that you had. And we've only touched on the importance of this policy. But now we're going to move on to the next panel, which is the lessons that we've learned from this. And our speakers are Shipra Narang Suri, who's Chief of Urban Practices Branch at UN Habitat, Tony Venables, the Professor of Economics at the University of Oxford, Rudiger Arend, Head of Economic Analysis, Statistics, Multi-Level Governance Section in the OECD Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions and Cities, and Louis Dijkstra, the father of this project, I think we could say, the Head of Economic Analysis Sector of the DG Regio European Commission. I don't mean to discredit others who've worked on this, but Louis's passion for this is catchy. Okay, let's move on to the panel, please. So you had some questions from the other panel, but right now I'm going to turn to Shipra and ask, because I think the question that was posed is very much in your space, which is, do you think this new approach here is going to change the spatial planning and urban policy practices of UN Habitat and of the countries that you work with? Shipra?
Thanks, Jeannie. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much. And thanks for the very insightful conversation that preceded this panel. And also we're grateful to be involved with this exercise. You're absolutely right. You know, many speakers before us talked about the rural-urban dichotomy, which is completely outdated and which this report has shown to be completely outdated. But also the findings around you know, the densification are very, very critical. The findings also around metropolitan growth and what constitutes a metropolitan area, the rise in some areas of large, in some regions of the world of large metropolitan areas, and the shrinking metropolitan areas in others. So, you know, there's many interesting findings here which will impact what we are doing. I think what this report will also do is significantly advance the cause of a spatial, data-driven and evidence-based approach to planning. It has not always been there, and I say that as a planner. There are many of us who are planners in this space. The second thing is we've had a lot of interest in national urban policies, subnational urban policies, national spatial strategies, but it's not universal. And I think what this report tells us is also, when you talk about settlements, you have to look at settlement hierarchy, you have to look at growth poles, you have to look at gateways, you have to look at intermediate towns, you have to look at the whole urban-rural continuum and take a much stronger territorial approach, which is what UN Habitat also talks about in its guiding principles on urban territorial planning and its urban-rural linkages. So I think that's very much there. I also want to address Same's point about whether we go dense and focus on brownfield development, or we expand and go on greenfield. And I think for Habitat, we've been talking about planned city extensions and planned city infills for many years. The key word is planned. The planned areas within cities and within urban, large urban territories are declining. So the key is really less of it's not so much a contradiction, but it's really the key to this is planned urbanization. We know the climate cost of sprawl, so it's not a real choice if we look at how cities are growing, and I think that's quite important. On the typology, this new typology that the report is talking about, you know, you talk about cities, you talk about towns and semi-dense areas. That will have a major implication. Sami was talking about both a technical and a political implication of infrastructure investments in these different categories of areas. So I think this report has the potential to change our perspective on many things.
So Tony, I'd like to have you address this issue of where development might occur from an economic point of view. What have we learned from this study in terms of your discipline and the way you think about cities? I think you're on mute.
Unmute, I got there. Yeah, no, we learn a huge amount about the heterogeneity between cities, I think. The fact that, okay, during early stages of development, you know, development is spatially concentrated, so inevitably, you know, it starts in particular places, and some cities really get going and the drivers of development. But then we see huge differences in the performance of cities. Some of them really have managed to achieve, you know, the miracles of job creation and productivity and all these economic benefits of agglomeration and of cities. Others much less successful in doing that. So we certainly, I mean, that's something that I guess we knew, but it's coming out very clearly in this report, I think. And obviously the report is producing the data to enable us to actually get further with thinking about the really difficult questions of causality. You know, why these heterogeneity, these different performances occur. On the where, I mean, I think you were referring back to Sammy's question and Vernon as well. There, I think I'm going to give a sideways answer, which is some do's and some don'ts. You know, the first don't is don't make general prescriptions for all countries. So the idea that, you know, you could be building here, not there, really.
That's very important. We can't underline that enough.
Don't do general prescriptions, and I'm about to do one. I'm about to do several, actually. Don't build in the middle of nowhere. Build where people want to live, which sounds self-evident, but it's not a rule that's always been followed. Do
you want to reconcile that point with Shifra's, which is you better do some planning here?
Well, I think you can plan cities in places where people want to be. So let me run through my list. I mean,
I would like to go through the list, but I might
do encourage density. Do remove obstacles to densification. I mean, we know from the reports that a surprising amount of city growth has taken the form of densification. But we also know, that inefficient land use is a critical constraint in a lot of cities. So land, in a sense, land is the ultimate scarce factor in cities. So do use land efficiently. So that's an argument for densification of existing centres.
Give an example of that. For example, I'm thinking of some of the cities of the global south. One might say the informal settlements might be a barrier.
Yeah.
So
the underlying problem there is probably lack of clarity in land tenure, lack of clear land rights. So that creates barriers to development of that land. So I'm not saying use it efficiently by bulldozing the slums, but I am saying the underlying frictions that prevent the land being developed in a really useful, productive way.
That actually
any major city should end up with slums dotted around its city centre. We expect to see an evolution of land use as tenure gets clarified to the benefit of the occupants of that land, amongst others.
We'll let you continue with your list. Okay, remove barriers.
Oh, where was I?
Sorry about that, I distracted you.
Yeah, enable coordinated development. I hesitated whether to agree with Shipra and use the word planned. I think that's sort of what I meant, but I don't mean centrally planned. I mean, enable development to take place at scale. We don't want, well, I don't want, I suspect the authors of the report don't want, unregulated, unplanned sort of urban sprawl, leapfrogging little developments. If there are going to be developments around the edge of cities, then they should become satellite cities in themselves. So that takes scale, it takes coordination, possibly by government, possibly by private agents, as we know in various countries around the world. So enable that coordination. And again, it's about getting, well, there are a lot of market failures, right? It's a coordination failure. If you want to do things to scale, you have to allow that coordination to take place.
Which addresses one of the questions we have from the audience, which is the role of governance and institutions in the development scenarios that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay.
One of the questions that I think you prepped, or someone prepped me with, was what are the policy priorities? To which the answer is, the overarching answer is governance. Getting empowered and capable local government. And I think we really see this very clearly now. I mean, you think of, what is the policy locus for climate adaptation? What's the policy locus for handling a pandemic? I mean, it's the city, right? So those two examples, as well as all the routine things of public services and transport and connectivity and all this stuff. The locus for so many issues is the city. That getting an integrated, capable, empowered local government, and that means fiscal authority, means having a tax raising authority, is number one on my list of priorities.
Well, I think we'll turn to Rudiger here and ask him a question about the well-being in cities. And also, let's think about the hierarchy of decisions that have to be made from central government down through local government. Would you like to address that issue, Rudiger?
Before I do that, I maybe wanted to add some words on shrinking cities. I mean, that have been referred to already several times. But we're also having like a kind of like a chart in the report where we're looking at the cross section and basically looking kind of like for different levels of population increase or decline in the country. What does it make to the the share of your cities which will be having shrinking populations? And because I mean, so far you may have the impression that maybe shrinking cities is mainly a problem of smaller ones, but that's not the case, at least not if you're having a shrinking population. I mean, it's not an exact science, obviously, kind of looking at this cross-section, but gives you an order of magnitude. Order of magnitude, what we get from this cross-section is basically that if your population declines by 0.5% per year in the country, I mean, you should expect something like 2/3 of your cities to be shrinking. If your population decline in the country per year is 1%, you should be basically expecting almost every city to be shrinking with very few exceptions. So the point I'm trying to make here is kind of like, I mean, when I'm talking to policymakers and shrinking cities, I mean, I get the response usually that they're saying, oh yeah, we need to get more attractive. We need to get the economy going. We need to make our city more beautiful, and then people will come. That's a strategy that may be working for some cities and countries where population grows, but that's a strategy that absolutely sure will not work for almost all cities and countries where population decline. So basically what's really important as well with this smart management of city declining populations in cities is that people basically stop the denial. I mean, I'm not saying they shouldn't try to make the city more attractive, that's great, but they should also kind of like, I mean, accept that probably, highly likely, they probably still have a declining population and they need to prepare for that and make sure that kind of like, I mean, the income they have, they can use that's sufficient to kind of like provide the infrastructure they need for the population. So they really need to be planning for that. And if they're doing that, I mean, then the city can be, even with less people living there, still be very attractive. I mean, for example, Paris, I mean, during the confinement, when a lot of people went to the countryside, to their country houses, Paris was still a fantastically attractive city. So, I mean, it's not because you're having a little bit less population in the place that it automatically means that kind of like, I mean, your place is going down. So that's the first point I wanted to make. And just coming back to your question on well-being and I mean, different levels of governance. I mean, it's obviously, I mean, you're seeing, there has been a bit of debate actually before, especially also in the academic literature, on whether kind of like people in the cities are happier than people in the countryside. I mean, some people have argued, I mean, people are going to the cities, so the real preference is that actually, I mean, they prefer being in the cities. But then again, I mean, there have been people arguing the opposite, and it's really clear that with the report we've been doing now, with the coherent definition that we have been really able to answer this question, I mean, coherently. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean that now the problem is solved. That means also kind of like we really need to make an effort to kind of like, I mean, increase the possibilities of people who are not living in the cities. So I kind of like, I mean, that means that the opportunities need to be created. That means obviously very different things and very different levels of development. But one of the things we've been seeing during the confinement is the possibility of being digital, of being able to telework is also very important. And if you're in a place where basically your digital infrastructure is so bad that basically you can't do that, I mean, then you have an additional inconvenience, and it's really making it very hard for those places. So there's certain things that we need to be sorting out and thinking also about kind of like what kind of infrastructure we need to be providing, especially in the towns and kind of like in other places to kind of like make them attractive and to kind of like allow the people to really participate in the life, also in difficult situations like the one we are facing at the moment.
I think we need to put you in conversation with Shipra and Tony on this in terms of the barriers and the planning. But before we do that, I would just want to give Louis a chance to answer a question we have that is basically from Jagdev Virdi, who said, as a statistician involved with the definition from its roots over 10 years ago, congratulations. A huge milestone to reach this year with the UN Statistical Commission, the OECD using it, and so forth. However, he says, I think there'll be challenges in some countries using this definition. So here's the question. What can you do to help this adoption of this new definition, and how can we make the data availability easier? Louis?
Yeah, thank you, Jeannie, and thank you, Dev. We've worked closely with Dev, and he's helped us also with discussing this definition in India, among other places. What we're going to try and do is help more countries implement this after their next census. So especially countries that do a digital census, it'll be quite easy for them to develop a population grid. And then with all the tools that we've developed together with the Joint Research Center, the European Commission, they can quite easily apply that. And so we're planning to train a number of countries who then can be regional or local, case studies or leaders and can disseminate that further. We're also hoping to have other organizations work on this, like UN Habitat, World Bank, Eurostat, etc. So we're quite optimistic that together with all the different partners in the coalition that we can actually help a lot of countries implement this definition. And in the end, it is relatively simple. So it's not rocket science, and it's quite easy to replicate. And I've actually presented this definition to countries who had already applied it themselves. I remember going to Korea, and they were like, I was walking them step by step through the definition. They're like, Louis, what are you talking about? We've already applied it. These are the results. They're great. I'm like, oh, okay. So, you get a lot of surprises in this work. I also wanted to pick up on the question of densification versus expansion there. And I like the line from my commissioner. It's not, you don't want to one size fits all policy. So I'm going to agree with Tony, you don't want to do the same thing everywhere. And we came up with something which I thought was kind of cute. We introduced the idea of a city mass index. Kind of like the body mass index, right? You can be roughly right, you can be a little bit on the skinny side, or you can be a little bit on the overweight side. And so we basically look at the amount of capital stock in a city, the built up area, the buildings, the infrastructure per capita. And you can have a lot, you can have about average, or you can have really not enough. And then you can look at the changes over time, and we actually see quite a lot of low income cities already don't have enough capital stock and can't even keep pace with population growth. So these are cases where you see a very clear evidence of underinvestment historically that's worsened by the rapid population growth that they can't keep up with. So instead of saying all cities should do the same, all cities should become denser, all cities should really focus their concentration, their population, I think here we're pleading for more investment and maybe more expansion in the cities that need it, and more concentration in the cities that don't. I think in North America, transit-oriented development makes a lot of sense. Is that the key goal for Kenya or South Africa? Not so sure. I think in some of these cities, you see already very high densities, 8,000, 10,000 inhabitants per square kilometer. Do they need to really become denser still? I'm not so sure. So I would say, take a nuanced approach, take a coordinated approach, and allow for a little bit more expansion and a little bit more investment in the cities that need it most.
Okay, well, let's go back. Thank you very much. I love the body mass, city mass index. You're going to have to do some slides to show us what it means as far as that goes. So let's go back to our trio, which talking about planning, coordination, barriers, and well-being, and see if they have some responses to each other in terms of what they were saying. For example, Rudiger, someone has asked, when we speak about towns like in East Germany or Portugal that lost 10,000 people in 10 years, do you think this is not a bit less, it is not a bit less population like in metropolitan areas, but needs to face a new strategy? Do you think so? And then we'll come back to Shipra and ask her about balanced territorial.
No, That was exactly the point I was trying to make. It's kind of like, I mean, when you're facing serious population decline, I mean, then you really need to think about it. I mean, and you need to think how you can kind of like manage your city in such a situation. When you are in a country where kind of like your population is stable or slightly increasing, right, then you can also try to kind of like, then maybe also kind of like you have a fundamental problem with your city, and that's why people are leaving, because maybe there's no economic opportunity or something. So maybe you could, to some degree, kind of like slow that population decline down by kind of like trying to get more activity going. But I mean, fundamentally, a population decline will be a problem in a lot of cities going forward. And whatever you do to kind of like, I mean, build on your economic structure, if your population, your country is declining, the population in your city is very likely to decline as well. And people just need to be facing that reality and that truth, because otherwise they will not take the right measures to kind of like manage the decline in a smart way and to basically ensure that the city remain livable, attractive places for those people who are still there. I mean, it's important that basically do something for the people who are there, rather than, you know, I mean, being sorry about the people you have lost. I think it's very important to be forward-looking and trying to be active to improve this situation. So that's the way I meant it. I by any means, I didn't want to say that it's not an unfortunate situation if you're having a very much population that's leaving your place. And it's a difficult situation. I understand this, but I mean, still you need to face the reality. I mean, you try to do the best on the situation that you have, basically. And again, I totally agree that people should be trying to kind of like, I mean, increase the attractivity of the place to kind of like, I mean, stop or reverse this flow, but they should also kind of like start managing this, because I mean, otherwise they're kind of like building the whole policies on positive wishes they may or may not be realizing, but I mean, this is not really then very, very solid policy. I just wanted to make another point, basically kind of like based on the density discussion that we were talking about, and Louis' point, and then also to some degree Tony and Chipra's points. The point is, when you're having already had relatively high density and you're further increasing density, I mean, then actually what you're doing, I mean, you're massively increasing the infrastructure that you need to kind of like make this high density really workable. Because basically you need much better high quality, high-rise buildings. You need kind of like a lot of, metro infrastructure with lots of exits and entries and everything. So basically when we're talking about countries where maybe already infrastructure is not really abundant, kind of like, I mean, then kind of like trying to further densify, and which are already extremely dense, and a lot more denser than most other cities, and certainly more denser than most cities in the OECD. So kind of like, if you're already having this high density in these places, if you're further densifying these places, I mean, you're really creating a need for a lot of investment infrastructure. And if you're not doing it, then you're really making, I mean, a very low quality cities, which are not going to be functioning very well. So one needs to be very carefully thinking also about that aspect of densification.
Tony, you want to address these comments, and also the ability to manage shrinkage?
Let me make a couple of remarks, more or less, on the questions. Yeah, I think this is an area where people have a tendency to use words like balanced, as if that's sort of inherently good, or densification, where you're either on one side or the other. It's either inherently good or inherently bad. We really do need to just diagnose the problems here. There's nothing intrinsically good about balanced development, but if there are places where people are really, left behind, declining towns where there are no jobs, declining public services, then we have a problem. So let's sort of diagnose the problem and then think about the way to handle it. That's certainly for declining towns, unbalanced in that sense. On densification, it is capital intensive. If people are willing to pay for that, then I have no problem with it. If they're asking for public funds to densify it for them, then I do. I should say I'm not a total free marketeer here, despite being an economist, but we do just have to sort of drill down a little bit rather than use these words, as well as using these words.
Well, there might be some investment priorities in the public sector that would be related to densification. For example, the provision of public transit, which might break down some barriers that you were talking about. Would you be opposed to that?
Sorry, I missed the question at the end of that.
How would you feel about how priorities are set with regard to public investments that may assist or not assist in densification and breaking down barriers that are created by densification?
I think there are rational, systematic ways to work out the costs and benefits of public investments such as transport infrastructure. So let's do that on a case-by-case, context-specific way, rather than general statements. Sorry.
That's all right.
But we can make a general point here.
Yes.
So, you know, we did try and look at the relationship between the need for transport networks, the ones that were already provided, the frequency and the speed. And what we clearly saw is that, you know, at a certain point, the benefit of additional density of reducing the network you need to provide public transport to the population is really quite limited. So from that point of view, there is definitely a minimum density, which is beneficial for public transport provision, making it cheaper and easier to provide. But many, you know, increases beyond that, you know, if you reach, say, 5,000 inhabitants per square kilometer, then it works quite well. If you go up to 7 or 9 or 10, it doesn't really reduce, say, the network you need to provide people with public transport. So to say we need to have denser cities just because we otherwise can't afford to provide public transport, I don't think that's correct. So I think there is an argument to be made that, you know, density up to a point is beneficial. Beyond that, it's basically a luxury good that people can pay for or not.
Okay, Shifra,
I'm going to jump in on this. I've been dying to jump in on this very exciting question. Okay, Louis, the last point, exactly. I think like all numbers, you know, averages hide more than they reveal. So a nuanced approach, a differentiated approach within cities is very important. What Tony was saying before, very often you have, I mean, you look at places like Bangladesh, you look at India, you look at, you know, you'll have areas which are 15,000 people per square kilometer or 23,000 people per square kilometer. And then you have this patchwork of completely unutilized, inefficient parcels of land, you know, so you really have to go much deeper and have a much more nuanced and differentiated response even within a city. And I think particularly within a city. And your point about optimum density is absolutely spot on. I mean, but what is that optimum density? And that's where the numbers and the cost benefits that Tony was talking about really have to come into play, along with this definitional work that has happened. But I want to address two other points, Jeannie, very quickly. On the territorial development, and I'm now cautious about using the word balanced because Tony is going to say what.
Okay.
But you know, we have seen there is a lot of interest. There was a lot of interest over the past several years on national urban policies. What we are seeing is that there is a growing interest on sub-national urban policies. So urban policies also have to be at the right scale. And you know, at the appropriate level, they can lead to a much more sensible approach, a much more coherent approach to reducing inequality within a region rather than across a whole country. I mean, if you look at India or if you look at Mexico, a national urban policy just may not make sense at all at that scale. But a sub-national urban policy at the scale of a province or a scale of a state makes perfect sense. So I think that kind of an approach is very important in terms of achieving that balance that we were talking about. And a final point on governance. Tony made a very, very strong case. I was really pleased to hear about strengthen local governance. But I think strengthen local, but strengthen multi-level governance. Because what happens is, and the metropolitan reference in this report is so important, metropolitan areas fall off the governance conversation very often when you talk about strengthen local governance, you know. So I think strengthening multi-level governance and strengthening metropolitan governance, particularly because metropolitan areas, if they don't have an elected government, they don't have a taxation power, they don't have a stable fiscal base, you know, the challenges of managing those metropolitan areas become extremely problematic. So finding the right financial mechanism also for that intermediate metropolitan level of governance is going to be absolutely critical to make these areas functional. I'll leave it there.
Certainly learned that from this report, for sure. And this report has really taught us many things. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to leave our audience with one sentence that you'd like them to remember. And I'm going to start with Lewis.
I'll say urban continuum, you know, think from village to town to city to megacity to metropolis.
Thank you. Rudiger.
Following up on Chipra, I mean, I think also the metropolitan governance is particularly important also in the dimension of land use, because otherwise, if kind of like different municipalities are all doing their own stuff, and we end up with kind of like very suboptimal, non-coordinated projects, as Tony was saying, that we shouldn't have, basically.
Tony?
Cities are about job creation. Give us job.
Okay, there we go. Thank you very much, everyone, for your wonderful, lively conversation on this brilliant report. And I'm sorry we couldn't get to all the questions in the question and answer, but we'll keep those questions and have them responded to by staff who would like to respond to them in this conversation. But thank you again, a big hand for our panelists. Now we will move on to our closing. And we have remarks from Joachim Oviedo Martins, who's the Deputy Director of OECD, the Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions and Cities, and Bernard Magnon, Deputy Director General of JRC of the European Commission. Gentlemen, the outlook for implications for the future.
So I start, Eugenie?
Sure. Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you, Eugenie. So I think we heard many thoughtful comments, and you know, people stress the importance of data. Everything at OECD starts with data. Everything at OECD starts with comparable data. And I think this is a wonderful sort of undertaking by the European Commission, the OECD, and the 4 other international organizations, the World Bank, etc. And of course, all the people that made this happen, and I'm thinking about Lewis, he has been really the driver, Rudiger, Paolo, Lucas, and many others. So what I have to say as a concluding remark, remarks at the end of all this, I think I would like to formulate a wish. And the wish is that with this new data set, we will be able to understand better the relationship between urbanization and development. And this in some sense echoes many things that were said this afternoon. As Lamia said, we cannot really establish a causality between urbanization and development. It's certainly a concomitant process. We know that urbanization is certainly a necessary condition for development. We don't know any countries that developed without urbanizing. But we also know that this is not a sufficient condition in some sense, because many countries urbanized without the expected returns on development. We also know that as economies evolve towards the tertiary sector, and this also was stressed by Commissioner Ferreira, as they evolve towards the tertiary sector, we need cities because services require proximity. So this is the way to go. But so the issue here is not, in the understanding of this link between urbanization and development. It's really the shape of this urbanization process. Is this sort of requires this ever-going concentration in larger and larger cities, or could we have something a bit different? I don't want to use this word balanced development that Tony doesn't really like, but something as again, Elisa Ferreira said on this idea of a network of cities, also the idea that expressed by this concept of national urban policies. Why that? Because this managing very fast growth of cities is something which is extremely challenging. And this can be a bottleneck for development. So if really the way for development, the path for development is really this increasing concentration, this certainly is a bottleneck for development in many countries. Why? Because as some has said, we need infrastructure, we have this density of capital, because we have the need for the provision of public services, education, health, and we need a lot of governance. I know very few countries that tick all these boxes in a sort of optimal manner. It's extremely difficult to manage these phases of exponential growth in cities. A city that grows, as Vernon said at 5% per year, it means doubling size every 13, 14 years, right? So this is extremely, in some sense, difficult to manage, and perhaps cities that had the chance of having some good planning that directs this growth, probably they had at the end perhaps a better chance of coping with this very fast growth. And for example, I think New York is a very good example, or some very intelligent indications of planning actually helped to manage the city growth. So I think, my wish is really that this data will help to manage and anticipate the patterns of very rapid urban growth. So what are the conditions for a good urbanization that are strained by these very rapid urbanization processes? We know if we are able to attach other data to this new urban data, like for example, we did at the OECD with the functional urban areas. We first defined the functional urban areas, and then we created a database, GDP, employment, land, etc., human capital, that actually is attached to this new definition of cities. If we're able to do this kind of sort of work with this new data, we'll be able to do, for example, scaling analysis to identify what kind of conditions are the most strained when we have this very fast growth. So I think having this data to manage and anticipate patterns of population decline, as Rudiger said, I think this is also very important. We have this process of aging going on in all OECD countries. I think this is a very important priority. And finally, this idea of the density and the advantage of density. And this, of course, is related with this very recent crisis of COVID. We have the impression that these economies of agglomeration that we want, when we go to cities, this is what we are looking for, right? Because they increase productivity, wages, etc. In the current conditions, they may also have generated a sort of urban penalty, sort of urban health penalty that was forgotten. This exists in the 19th century, and then it was completely overcome because the life expectancy in cities is much bigger than in rural areas. So this was totally overcome, and now in some sense it comes back. But we also know that actually this link between density, agglomeration, etc., and the spread of the virus and contagion is not obvious, because actually it's more the quality of the urbanization that probably will determine whether or not indeed density could generate this sort of higher speed, I would say, of the contagion. There is also another sort of point that I think is very important, is that people, when look at the urban processes in the past, we saw many cities being under very strong shocks, both physical shocks like wars, destruction, etc., and or health shocks like, for example, the Spanish flu in the 1920s. And in some sense, cities always reborn from the ashes. They're like phoenixes, right? But there was one thing that didn't exist before that we have now, which are the digitalization technologies. So these digitalization technologies enable indeed to do things at distance. And we didn't do this before. Before, the only option was indeed to go for agglomeration, especially if you want to go indeed towards the development of services. That thing has changed. There is, in some sense, this time is a bit different. So I know that we have been doing all kinds of prospects about this, the world becoming flatter, and this never happened. But still, I think we have to take into account this impact of digitalization. We have statistics, for example, of the number of jobs that can be done at distance in a region like Paris. 50%. 50% of the jobs, and as Tony said, the cities are about jobs. 50% of the jobs in Paris can be done at distance. This, with this new digital technology, should make a difference. And I think this crisis, in some sense, accelerated these trends. And really, my final point is, I think this idea of the continuum, as Lewis said, I think now that we have this data, we'll be perhaps in a much better position to understand the kind of policies that are needed for these intermediate spaces. These are not really urban policies, and it really rural policy, something in the middle, but we have at world scale 30% of our population living in this area. So we need a much better understanding of these interactions between rural and urban in order to design policies that are much better adapted to this kind of intermediate spaces. So I think we are living here a great moment. I think this is a great breakthrough, and there are really, my wish, again, I repeat, is that this would enable to understand much better this link between urbanization and development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very perceptive comments about the challenges and opportunities that this new work presents us. Bernhard. Is Bernhard here?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, now
okay.
we can.
Thank you, Eugenie. I must say I really enjoyed the discussion we had this afternoon. I heard that we have a global recognition that having developed global definition of cities, urban and rural areas has framed something, created something new, and this report is the outcome of something new. Now, as you know, the GRC is the scientific service of the European Commission, and we provide data and scientific evidence to the policymaker to make them make the good decisions in the context of our political priorities. I would like to mention here that this report is a first step, which is a big success, as recognized by many of you. But it's a first step, and I would like to use the opportunity to kick off the second phase and give you a few insights on what we are working on for you to see where we are going. So the first element I want to mention, of course, we will continue working together, because working together enriches largely our boundaries and the reflection on this type of reports. But we will also work with countries and scientific community to provide more data, better tools, and more expertise. So that's one. In the report, you have seen that the time span for our data, very often the charts, you see 1975 to 2015. We must, of course, work to a wider time span, and we are already now working on an update to bring the data to 2020, which will further enrich the data set. A good news also is that new data will be for the first time based on European data from the Copernicus Sentinel-2 satellites. So that's very important to mention, because the Earth Observatory, which data production will be integrated in Copernicus, meaning that we will have long-term availability of data and annual updates of build-up maps, which will facilitate our life in the future. We will also use new technologies like artificial intelligence and cloud computing to get additional things. And I just want to mention two things: estimation of the build-up volumes of cities and the usage of buildings. This will come now also up with the new technologies. We are currently also working on new features, analysis of the future growth of build-up areas and population. We are currently in discussion with DG Regio and the UN Population Division to develop spatially explicit projections of build-up areas and population growth until 2050 and possibly 2100, meaning opening further the time span of what we do, which is something essential for a lot of policy domains. In reply to the UN Statistical Commission to help countries implementing the new methodology we talked about today, we have developed a set of tools to allow the countries to apply the methods with their own national data. So that's also something we will give back to the countries. And of course, we have prepared the training curriculum, which is already available and will be made available so that member states, countries can develop their own capacity in terms of knowledge. Finally, we contribute under the lead of Eurostat to produce a statistical manual that describes the new definition and their implementation. And this manual will be available, published at the UN World Data Forum later this year in October 2020. So we have seen during this conference that our report has a lot of potential. There are many areas, obvious ones that were also mentioned by the different speakers, and just to sustainable development goals is one, where you could use this data in the field of healthcare facilities or all-weather roads, just to give two examples. But there are less obvious domains that we also need to explore. For instance, the work of the International Organization for Migration and the World Bank, analyzing the location of refugees and internally displaced persons with different needs, if they are located in urban and rural context, could be another outcome of our future analysis. So we are very committed to continue working together, continue working with all of you, and we really look forward to move from this success to other successes in the near future. And thank you very much also for the organization of this event, and to the organizers. Have done a great job. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. This is obviously an open sesame project from all that you've described will happen in the future. It's very exciting. I had a note here in our chat that the commissioner who began our meeting would like to say a little something to send us off. Commissioner Ferreira?
Well, thank you very much. I've been listening throughout the whole discussion, and I just want to tell you that I really think it was a very, very important and interesting discussion. At the moment I sent it, I was really, then with the intervention by Luis, by Shripa, and by Joaquin, I think what I was going to say is covered. But in fact, I think we have got to, the information that we get, the tools we get are of major importance. Now, I think we have got to fine-tune the message when we come from describing what is happening to policy recommendations. Because when we come to policy recommendations and now you have the instruments and financial tools to act, it's very important to understand, what is the margin that can be managed at the urban area as such and at the city level as such. And I think Shipra mentioned it very clearly, what you can do with the tools that you have, because most of the taxes are collected at a central level. And often this agglomeration and this density embodies in itself huge inequalities, which really create more disadvantage than advantages, which is sometimes a consequence also of the lack of success of, I'm sorry to say it, cohesion policy and other policies that should really have given conditions for people not to have to immigrate to these big metropolises where they don't have any life quality. So there are lots of issues that really came to my mind, as well as you mentioned the country I know the best, as we now have to say in the Commission. But in fact, if you have a macro policy that squeezes down wages, of course, you have a massive brain drain. And this affects not only the physical capital of per capita of the towns, but also, I don't like the word, but the human capital, because then you don't have, the leadership is gone. And so you are bound to stay without the engines that make the city develop what it is supposed to develop in terms of future-oriented technological drive. So, in fact, this is absolutely fascinating. I'm sorry, I'm not speaking now, I don't know, as a commissioner or whatever, but I really got engaged into the argument, and I really enjoyed sharing this moment with you. I just wait for the follow-up of what you are doing, and in fact, to try to use all the instruments that we have, not only to publish, papers, but also to kind of frame the way in which we can manage the responsibilities that we all have at the different levels. But thank you very much. It was extremely interesting, and I really enjoyed having this, this wonderful opportunity to think. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And thank you to Carla, Same, Vernon, Shipra, Rudiger, Tony, Joachim, Lewis, and Bernhard. Would you like more information about the project? Here is who people you can write to and the information for this. Again, if we had an audience present, you would hear mountains of applause for this spectacular work that has been done. Thank you, everyone.
And thank you to you as well. You managed it wonderfully.
Well, you can only manage it when you have good speakers.
There is an applause from here as well to you.
That's wishes to you all, and better data, better lives, better cities.
Thank you.